All right, and I am now honored to introduce our presenter today. Tonya Ward Singer is the founder of Courageous Literacy LLC, an organization that helps K-12 educators advance literacy and language learning in culturally and linguistically rich schools. Teachers and administrators describe Tonya's work as groundbreaking, dynamic, practical, relevant, and impactful. Tonya is the author of the bestsellers Opening Doors to Equity and EL Excellence Every Day, which is now in its second edition with the new title, Asset-Based Language and Literacy. She co-authored Breaking Down the Wall and Literacy Curricula for International Publishers. Tonya has taught across multiple grade levels and excels as an international consultant, helping schools build collective efficacy of all teachers through job-embedded, impactful professional learning. Beyond her work in schools, Tonya co-facilitates dialogues in nonprofit organizations committed to truth-seeking and transforming legacies of racial oppression. Thank you so much, Tonya, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, I'm so excited reading the chat. I see familiar names and I see educators ranging in the ages you teach or lead to support from kindergarten to high school. We have many different roles. And I know you're here for asset-based scaffolding, either for your own teaching or for your coaching or for your leadership to influence teaching and learning so that every student is successful. All right, beautiful. So our outcomes, you know, if you read and you registered, but just a quick review, we're going to focus on an asset-based framework to deepen access, which is what I'm all about, deepening access to intellectually rich learning. We're going to focus within that framework on the engage, observe, support sequence that can help us with the nuanced choosing, losing, and adapting of scaffolding that is at the heart of scaffolding to accelerate. And you'll leave with essential reflection questions and practical tools to reorient our focus on scaffolding to help every student thrive. So I'd like to really start with the end in mind, which is most important. What do we want to impact? We're not here just to adopt scaffolds in a checklist. We are here to impact student learning. So please share in the chat, what is one learning goal that is a very high priority for you personally to influence in your teaching, in your leadership? Pick something meaningful that when you see students thrive in this at the end of the year, you get tears in your eyes. All right. So we're thinking and typing in the chat. And once you've typed in the chat, read what comes in. Look for themes. Look for themes. All right, I see fluency, reading, accessing, core, critical thinking skills, and agency. Yes, please. Following through. Yes, increasing engagement with text. Writing, believing in themselves, a growth mindset. Student vocabulary, confidence, beautiful. To move them out of foundational reading skills and love reading, right? Have the purpose and joy of reading, meaning making, writing, excellent. I always start with this question, and if you're leading and scaffolding, be sure that you're focusing on the why, the purpose, the goal. This is what we put in our GPS as our destination. Our destination is not implement strategies with fidelity. It is impact student learning. And that is a very humble destination because it's one that dares us to adapt our approaches continuously. So we have a lot of great ideas here, and the ones I mentioned in my description, I focus a lot on making meaning from complex text, taking risks to problem solve, expressing ideas across the curriculum. Because I have a definite leaning and angle and passion towards intellectually rich learning for every child. But then the question is, how do we effectively scaffold intellectually rich learning without watering down expectations? That is a key question to ask. because a default and a traditional practice is scaffold to remediate, right? Okay, they can't do this yet, so let me do this. And we simplify, water down, and if done in some traditional ways, students can get sidelined. They can be tracked into a long-term process of not getting the intellectual rigor. So how do we manage the tension between these rigorous expectations and where a student may be in this moment and what they might demonstrate? Big concept is to shift from nouns to verbs. It's not about the strategy. So in this webinar, you will see me reference strategies, modeling, sentence frames, word banks. The strategies are important. They're like tools. But effective scaffolding, asset-based scaffolding, is not so much about the tool as the verbs we use to choose, lose, and adapt. So there's 6 essential mindsets and practices. And if you're familiar with my work, you've seen these. This is a framework I use for teaching, for collaborative inquiry, and for leading professional learning. We're not just trying to improve the scaffold. Scaffolding requires all 6 essentials. 3 are mindsets. Take a look at this list and notice which of these are mindsets. Go ahead and type in the chat the word in bold that you see here that's a mindset. 3 of these are mindsets. Yes, excellent, Maria. Thank you. Reflect is a mindset. Value is a mindset. The other one is expect. We know Hattie's work, teacher clarity, high expectations are important, and having high expectations for every student. Having high expectation for the students who have been labeled EL or special ed, any kind of label, sometimes brings with it a shift in expectations. So asset-based scaffolding requires a commitment to value students' assets and to expect excellence from every learner, even the learners who in this exact moment are not demonstrating what we're looking for. But it's believing in their capacity that and having the humility to reflect and adapt when they don't succeed. And it takes humility because it's a lot easier to say, well, that's because of the label, or that's because of the factor beyond my control. But asset-based scaffolding is humble and it's inquiry. So I'm sure there's a lot of assets here. What are assets? When I say assets, basing our teaching on assets, what do I mean? What do you mean? Please share an example of assets, of an asset that students bring to learning, of a strength you look for when you're teaching so that you can base your teaching on assets. Beautiful. And I aspire to learn from the chat because my next slide, I put a bunch of my ideas, but I bet there's better ideas when we put our heads together and we share everybody's assets. Beautiful. Ooh, resilience, David Lamb. I did not have that one on my slide. Beautiful. Perseverance, Amanda. Yes. Willing. Creativity. Thank you, Josefa. Yes. Creativity. Prior knowledge. Asking questions. Thank you, Sarah. Worldly experience, Alyssa Jimenez, thank you. Familiar capital, communication skills, tenacity, creativity. And it's really interesting. We need to all collaborate to brainstorm assets because we each have a lens and our lens shapes what we look for and what we see. But if we ask, what am I not seeing? Right? I brainstorm a bunch here, but you can read the chat and learn more than even looking at my slide. These are just ideas. Vocabulary, relating to an experience, multilingualism. So there's your home language, there's your multilingualism, and then there's your languaging practices, right? Like how are you, if you're translanguaging between languages, being curious about how students use their assets that might be different than how we might think of things or how we might process. Beautiful, beautiful. So when we say asset-based scaffolding, I mean all of these things. Traditionally, we talk about cultural assets, language assets, and that's important. And even the asset of, in this moment, noticing what a student does with the math problem, noticing how they interact with text, what's working. That's part of the assets. So I'm going to share a download with you. And if you have my book, EL Excellence Every Day, you have a version of this inside the front cover. And if you have my new asset-based language and literacy, new title, a lot of new content, you will also find this inside the front cover. Because I have a background, it disappears. But just even if you don't have the book, we're going to share with you a link so that you can download that. Thank you, Melissa. And that link takes you to the companion page for this book, and there's other downloads there. So just, don't get into them all now, but leave that open and bookmark it and come back for additional downloads. But I really want you to walk away with these 6 essentials and these 6 reflection questions. And what you see here, reflection questions for teachers and teams. So if you facilitate professional learning communities, PLCs, or whatever you call them, a group of teachers collaborating with a focus on impact, these questions help you engage in inquiry. If you're working by yourself, they help you engage in reflective practice. It's a framework for reflective teaching, reflective impact-based inquiry and collaboration. And each of these is powerful, but you're going to see some of these questions should be familiar to anybody who's been teaching. Obviously the value is important. Does every student feel a sense of belonging and connection in our classes? Belonging. Yes, I still use that word and we all should. Does every student feel a sense of belonging and connection in our classes? That's the evidence. If we are valuing assets, they feel belonging. If they feel like they have to leave themselves at the door and change who they are to belong, then we have some work to do to learn assets and to create a more inclusive, welcoming environment, which is going to be necessary for engage, observe, support, which I'll explain soon, to work. No one wants to take risks in an environment where we don't feel welcome. And we're asking in this webinar, how are we connecting to students' prior knowledge, cultural, linguistic assets, lived experiences? But this next question, this should be familiar to everybody. What are our goals, right? What does success look like? And then we engage students specific to our goal. What do they demonstrate? Then we observe to get formative data about assets, not just what isn't working. And we choose, lose, and adapt supports, and then reflect. So I'm going to focus a little more deeply on engage, observe, support for scaffolding, but understand those mindsets of value, expect, reflect, they make or break whether we scaffold effectively. Similar to my question of how do we scaffold without watering down is how do we choose, lose, and adapt supports? This is the nuance. So whether you're a new teacher, an experienced teacher, I don't know, this is lifelong learning. I'm still learning. I'm still learning how to do the nuanced scaffolding because every student teaches me. They think differently than me and they teach me, oh, the way I thought I'd support that wasn't actually the right fit for this kid. If you know my previous book, you've seen this, and I definitely keep this in the second edition, but this is your quick guide to think about. You want the sweet spot where students actively engage in learning through challenge. So think about what happens when you over scaffold. Over scaffold. You get what you see below here. Students just copy our model. Their responses are predictable and canned. They really don't think and problem solve. They're just following you. You did the I do. Now it's the we do. They're copying. you don't get a good assessment. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. If I'm teaching newcomers and they're learning to speak in English for the very first time, or Spanish, or whatever language I'm teaching, I might have them copy. I might have them repeat. But when I'm trying to get students to then transfer that knowledge, or I'm trying to get students, if I go back to the chat and I look at all these goals people set, critical thinking. I can't I do, we do, you do critical thinking. I mean, yes, I can model it, I can guide you, but at a certain point, I need to just let you engage in productive struggle. So trying not to over scaffold is part of the intention and part of the goal. But then, of course, we under scaffold and we go think, pair, share, and we get think, pair, stare. Or everyone's just, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Well, that's evidence, formative data in the moment, that we need to increase supports. So to recognize that good teaching is always about adapting, that's very important. If you are a leader or a coach, it's so important to lead with a culture of humble learning, not a culture of performance. In schools where there's a culture of performance, people don't want to take risks in front of their supervisors and their coaches. They want to like over scaffold so that everyone performs and there's nothing uncertain. But in schools where there's a culture of learning, people know that actually it's better to do that lesson where you under scaffold a little and you take a chance to let kids actually figure things out. You take a chance to get formative data. So engage, observe, support is the go-to for me to test out the edge of the right scaffolding. And it's trial and error. It is trial and error. If you're coming in with a canned plan, guess what? That's not student-centered. It might work, but be ready to engage, observe, and adapt your plan. So here's an example from my personal life. Okay, I love backpacking. Anyone else wilderness crazies out there, you can give a little shout out in the chat. But just last week, I took friends backpacking, and I'm very passionate about equal access to the wilderness. So I just love taking women out backpacking. And I'm going to give this example of engage, observe, support with a very straightforward example with a topo map, which is what you see here. So I'm teaching some friends how to use a topo map. I've showed them on the map where we're going before we did the trip, but now we're in the middle of this trip. It's a multi-day trip. And I pause and I do engage. Okay, where did we hike on our first day and where did we camp last night? And I have two friends who are I'm looking for transfer and I'm looking to see what they can do. Let them kind of figure it out together. I step back, I don't say anything. And I'm watching them figure it out. So that's engage. Observe. I'm watching for assets. So I'm noticing meaning-making strategies. I'm noticing connections and relevant skills. You don't have to have any topo map experience. If you can read, you're going to problem solve. You're going to go, wait a minute, we did something called 10 lakes. I found the word 10 lakes here. I wonder if that's connected. We camped by a lake. Oh, was it this lake? So I'm watching. What do they do? What do they know? What connections are they making? Then I support. So it's the difference of pointing it out, saying it, and kind of hoping they get it, and just a little formative assessment, and then streamlining my support. So let's take it into the classroom. Let me start with a word problem. A lot of classrooms will do a problem of the day, or students need to do mathematical word problems. One common task is to do a reading, read, annotate, pair. So I want you to read the word problem, annotate, underline the word problem, circle the relevant facts. Be prepared to tell your partner, what's the problem? What are the facts? So I do that as a think pair. I observe, gather formative data. Now, it's a whole classroom full of students. It's not just me and two friends backpacking, right? So this is harder. But I'm scanning. Are they engaged? And the beauty of think annotate is it slows things down, just like think write. Sorry, kindergarten teachers, you're going to be doing more think pair. right? But the think write or the think annotate, it slows it down so I can actually visually check. Are people underlining the right place? Do I see understanding? Who's confused? But I'm looking also for meaning making strategies, mathematical thinking. So I might overhear this conversation. That's a pair I'm going to walk by and go, okay, they know what they're doing. Let me focus and kind of scan the room for where more help is needed. I'm then going to provide support based on what I see. Now, one thing I'm not sharing visually in this webinar, but it is in my book, but it is that flexible grouping, right? Because I scan the room, I might notice, wow, more than half this class has it. I've got a group that might need help. Maybe I just pull that group right now and I model just with that group. So you make decisions about, is this going to be a teach everybody moment? Or is this going to be a teach some people moment? And within that, I'm looking to connect to what I've seen, the strengths that I've seen in the classroom. I'll go a little deeper with this one. This is one of my favorites. This is 6th grade, reading to understand. My husband teaches 6th grade, and today is the first day of student learning in our district. So hope that day is going well. So I have students reading a biography in English about Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Now, I purposely selected this topic because she's a bilingual author. Even though we're reading in English, she's from Mexico. She's a bilingual author. This is in a way a mirror text in valuing my students' history and culture. A lot of students from Mexico. It doesn't mean they know about Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. This could be new information, but I'm intentional in my text choices too. That also is helpful. So a series that I do, anticipate before reading is one of the ways, besides predictions, that we connect to assets when you do this age-old strategy of what do you notice, what do you wonder, right? Kindergarten teachers, 1st grade teachers, 3rd grade teachers, you're used to doing that picture walk. It's also very helpful up through high school, right? What do you notice, what do you wonder can be valuable, especially with a complex historical text, right? And they start recognizing, I don't think this is 2025, this picture. What is she wearing? Is she a nun? Right? They're going to have questions. And I'm going to notice their thinking, their prior knowledge. And then when we read to understand, this task is one of my favorite additional opportunities for students that is not written in curriculum. Usually what happens is in curriculum, you'll say, okay, read the text. What is the main idea? There are many teacher-directed questions. Before you do a teacher-directed questions, let kids read what makes sense, what's confusing, especially as they're reading complex texts. This creates that idea. You have permission to just be like, let me try to figure out what makes sense. Let me try to figure out what's confusing. And as they're having this think, pair, share, I'm checking for understanding. Another way I might do it, if there's a lot of complicated vocabulary and I'm not even sure what vocabulary to focus on or pre-teach, I might say circle confusing words and then compare with a partner. And I will go around and I'll tally the words that are circled and I'll choose one or two strategically where I can model context clues. So it's engage, observe, support. Notice how my example, the observe is the key. I am making decisions in the moment about how much to scaffold. Sometimes I plan to cruise ahead and get to my higher order thinking question. But as they're talking about what makes sense and what's confusing, I realize from what they're saying, there's a big confusion in the text. That was with a different one, a poem. So engage, observe, and then I choose, lose, and adapt supports. So for reading to understand, of course, there's many different nouns, many different scaffolds you can use. And I have a lot of these throughout my book and my longer trainings, right? You can model, you can chunk the text. I might do think, pair, main ideas. What do I need to do to make sure people understand literally what this text is saying? And that they get to engage with it. They're not just listening to me summarize it, right? I'm not just like pulling them through it. I'm always giving them little risk-taking moments. Same text, I come back usually the next day because I go deep on this with the reread to analyze and infer. Curious how many of you do claim, evidence, reasoning, CER. A lot of people in secondary focus on that. Some people in elementary, they call it race, but I'm talking about the same thing. You're going to make an inference or a claim and support it with text evidence. So these are my goals here, and they're going to come back and read the text. Watch how I use engage, observe, support. Because I could model this. I could do I do, we do, you do. I could model, here's how you make a claim, here's how you support it. But I want to see how they think with the text. I want them to build confidence that their original processing and thinking with the text is an asset. That's not just like, I need to sit here and wait till the teacher tells me what to do. So I asked this question, what can you infer about Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz? And by the way, if you have students who maybe don't know even what that means by asking that question, you might build background as I did, and I had them talk about themselves. People who don't know me might infer that I am blank when they see me do this. So I actually had them talk about personality traits, character traits. People might think I'm enthusiastic when they see me, blah, blah, blah. So we did that before this lesson to build background and what I mean by infer and what I mean by character traits. But here we are with the text. And what I want you to do, we're going to engage, and I want you to just observe. It's read, annotate. First, they're annotating. They're going back over that text. So just notice what you see here as formative data to help you choose, lose, and adapt supports for that goal. And if you caught something, you could type it in this in the chat, right? This one student actually wrote down a claim. She is humble. And then also in the text it says, right? So I'm noticing a little spelling thing, but I'm also seeing my goal of claim and evidence. And here's a think, pair, share. This is the same think. You saw the think. The think was think, annotate. It was read, annotate. Now they're going to share with a partner. Really important scaffolding decision. I could give them sentence frames. I didn't give them sentence frames because I want to hear how they think and see how they think with the text. I had a few frames kind of over in one spot that I could use if I needed them to reference for a student or two, kind of in one-to-one support. But I notice how they speak. And I want you to look for these things. Look for a claim, an inference about Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and then look for text evidence and look for reasoning. But here's the catch. It's not necessarily in that order. Just because my brain thinks that way doesn't mean that's the order and the way students think. So pay attention to this.
She really felt confident in her idea that women were equal to men, and I think she really just stuck to the idea her whole life, and she really tried to change how women were seen at the time. Very productive to like mine was that like as Miss Singer said that she women they were not allowed to do things, but she discouraged from reading and how she liked all the social
before that women have a right to be educated just like men.
It also says in the first paragraph that women there were not allowed to attend school and were discouraged from reading, writing, poetry, and studying. However, Inés de la Cruz loved to do all of it. feel like that means she is hardworking and wants to get her education so she can become author.
So,
Summarize.
her family sent her to live at the royal court when she was 2 years old. Because I guess the bird people just after we're still Spanish.
All right. So take a moment to write in the chat something that you noticed, that you heard or saw students do. Ooh, Amanda, excellent intel. They're providing evidence for their opinion before stating their opinion. So think about that. They're reading the text and then they're interpreting the text, which is so helpful to notice. Amanda noticed that, and you know what? Years ago, I was doing inquiry with a team, and we had a graphic organizer we created of like clues to inference, and students were writing things in the wrong side of the organizer. But when we reflected on it, we realized that our organizer was lined up the way we think and wasn't lined up the process of how they process. So great intel to notice. Yeah, notice the way they're doing it.
Really?
Yeah, Lisa saw the respectful discourse frames, right? It's also, I'm seeing strength. So I didn't give them a sentence frame. If there was a sentence frame that I asked them to use, you would have heard everybody saying the same thing, right? I infer Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz is. In the text, it says, this shows me that. Now we're going to go to writing. And when they go to writing, that frame can be another tool. And that's when they have to get a little more formal in the sequence of their language. All right, you see summarizing, listening to each other. Beautiful, beautiful. So one thing that I did, here's an example of engage, observe, support to do a word bank. So a word bank is when you provide vocabulary that is useful for the task. So if I'm asking you, what can you infer about Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz? I could put all these words that are on the right. But instead of doing a teacher-directed word bank, what I did is what you just saw. I had them talk about the text. But as they were talking and I was checking for understanding, I was also writing a little list of the words I heard. Smart, intelligent, persistent. And when I called on individuals to share, I added their words to the list. So now we have a word bank of words that we might use to talk about Sor Juana Inez de la Cruz. This validates the students' word choices that are already in the classroom, and it provides differentiated support because there are other students who maybe they said smart, but they see another word there. They're like, ooh, wait, I want to do persistent, right? So this is going to be a scaffold for writing, but it's a scaffold that came from their assets, the words they're already using. On the left in purple, you see the word banks from that Think, Pair, Share where they talked about themselves. So we already had lively, enthusiastic words to describe them. Now we're getting more nuance and we're getting focused on the person we're reading about and how do we describe her. Now, engage, observe, support works best when you get to do it again, right? So there's one opportunity to take a risk with hopefully not too many scaffolds, right? I'm always choosing slightly less scaffolds than I need, but I'm ready. If they're all just sitting there not knowing what to do, I'm not going to waste our time. I'm going to give them a moment, see if they get it. But if they don't, we're not going to spend a whole class time of people being lost. I'm going to right away model, guide, support. So I'm ready to choose supports or lose supports. But what I do in this lesson, which I model in way more depth in my 2-day workshops that I do with my book, but we go from that read, annotate, pair that you just saw. Now with the same question, they're going to stand in a circle and share ideas with each other. So they're going to hear each other's ideas and justification and evidence. Then they're going to go back to their tables and collaborate to write. We use a color-coded writing strategy where they have different colors so you know who everyone has accountability. And they write a paragraph together with claim, evidence, and reasoning. So scaffolding to accelerate is also this. It is also creating multiple opportunities for students to use conversations and meaning making and collaborating as a scaffold for writing. So we're not just saying, here's the writing task, go do it by yourself. They're building to it. This is an instructional period. Now, I want to see if this transfers. In another period, I might say, okay, here's a question, here's a text, and see what they do by themselves. That'll be different formative data. But this is scaffolding in a powerful way where I am learning how they think and ways I can support them. And at every step, I observe and I can adapt supports. Collaborative writing, I focus in on a small group that needs my help while other people are rolling. So I can differentiate in a very mixed level skill classroom, which is the typical classroom. Reflect. Reflection is key. We're always asking, what are the impacts of what I did on students? So depending on what you're focusing on, if you're focusing on critical thinking, what are the impacts of my scaffolds on critical thinking? If you're focusing on language, what are the impacts of this on students' language? And then this is the key question that PLCs are not typically asking. What will I or we change in our teaching scaffolds and tasks to build on assets and address needs? We use formative data not just to sort kids into services, but to adapt. This is another download. It's at the same link we gave you before, but this is a download where I take differentiation charts, which are a key feature of my book. I have these throughout my book. But to think about scaffolds from substantial support, which is the darker orange, to the light support. So when you do engage, observe, support, you're leaning more towards light support. But then you're ready if you need to do emerging, and you will do emerging more often in language with newcomers. You're going to do a lot more emerging substantial supports with the young people. But you're also at every age, when you see a need, you're going to bring in those substantial supports. The I do, the we do. Beautiful. So notice the difference. Engage, observe, support is that middle level of support. And I do, we do, you do is substantial. Back to my point before, we have to shift from nouns to verbs. I've seen checklists that look for gradual release or explicit direct instruction as necessary for a certain population of students. And I would challenge that it is a tool, and it's not that using it every lesson is the goal. The goal is actually that students are actively engaged in productive struggle. They're actively making meaning from text. They're expressing ideas. All the goals you set, that's the goal. So sometimes we do I do, we do, you do. But if I'm coaching or I'm leading and I walk in a classroom and I see students thriving, but I didn't see the student do I do, the teacher do I do, we do, you do, I'm going to sit down and go, what did you do? I'm going to learn from them. Same thing with sentence frames. Never mandate that everyone use a sentence frame. Everyone should know how to use a sentence frame and be ready to use a sentence frame. But wow, have you ever seen students become so dependent on sentence frames they don't know how to start a sentence when they're looking for the teacher to help them start? I've seen that in districts where even in 8th grade, they've been there for 9 years and they're still waiting on a sentence frame. So we have to choose and lose. That is a key idea. Of course, if I need to I do, we do, you do to model it, I can chunk the task. I can model how to make an inference. I can model the writing. This is all good if I choose that, if it's needed. But then let me build on the assets I build with that lesson to help them transfer to something more complicated. So the same idea, the same 6 essential questions, the download you have, we also ask those questions about language. What language do students need? What language choices do they make? How will I support language? Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, for your reflection. Yeah, the learned helplessness and the trained helplessness. You're naming it, Lisa, right? I noticed that too with Think, Pair, Share. We wanted extended conversations, and we noticed kids are doing this. Say, answer question, answer question. There's no more conversation. So then we were using Jeff Weir's work to try to expand the conversation. And what we realized is that our tasks we were just asking them to answer a question. We weren't actually building a conversation. But that's another topic for another day, how to build rich conversations, which is a whole section 2 of my book. So every teacher can be effective in teaching language and content together when we are engaging, observing, supporting for content, but also noticing language choices, what language is needed, and we're reflecting. And always the next move we make, the next engage and support is going to be based on what we just learned from that last lesson. Here's a quick science example. Okay, so students in a lab, I'm giving you just a little blip of the lab report. They measured mass of ethanol before, they measured mass of ethanol after. And the task is they need to describe the observations and changes in mass using precise units of measurement in speaking and writing. Honestly, this was probably the easiest expressive tasks out of the whole lab. And I chose this also when I was helping a teacher support newcomers who were doing a lot of the work in their primary language, find a task that would also be accessible as a second language to try to take a risk. But for everyone in the class, I noticed they could benefit from this. So we do a think, write, pair, share. What was a change in mass? Describe it. Observe. So here's some examples of what students would say or write, right? You hear one partner just go 42. Someone else says it went down 42 to 32. Someone else might say first it was 42 grams, then 32. Someone else said the mass decreased by 10 grams. So this is typical. In any classroom, when you structure a task, you're going to see a huge range of responses. So I'm checking, are they understanding? Do they get the concept? And I'm looking at language choices because I want them to be able to express change effectively in scientific speaking and writing. And I see some assets in these responses. So I'm actually going to call on the student who's purple and blue here to share, but then I'm actually going to create a sentence frame using some of the language assets that they shared, right? Saying the mass decreased by. Wow, that is a powerful phrase that we can use in science. I can add to that increased by, decreased by. And use that as a sentence frame now. Decrease by how much? I could put the period there, but I'm going to go a step further and use this powerful language that the student whose response is in purple shared from what to what. So I could provide this sentence frame now and say, okay, you just shared with your partner, engage, observe, everybody shared. Now I want you to try on for size this scientific language and put your ideas in this sentence frame. Have them write it out. So this way they get the benefit of both. They get to express in their own words. I listen, I'm noticing language, and then I can teach them one way to express it. Now that's not the only way, of course. I'm going to choose or lose supports. Another way I could do this is provide this graphic organizer that I created on the left. You're going to describe before we did the experiment, before we burned, whatever the specific thing was, the ethanol was 42 grams. After. And then how do we describe change? Here's some different sentence frames you could choose. So I'm choosing and losing these supports based on what I saw in that first engage, observe. Remember this reflection question? Always reflecting. And if you're a leader or coach, you want to also say, what is the impact of my coaching on teaching practice? What is my impact of this professional learning on student learning, right? And am I willing to adapt? That's the humility. Now, this same framework, it's not just about what we teach ourselves in a classroom or help teachers teach in a classroom. It's also how we collaborate. We collaborate to clarify expectations, We collaborate to see what are student assets. We collaborate to analyze student work, not just by the rubric, not just for what they don't have, but what assets do we see? What language choices do they make? What concepts do we see? And then we collaborate to plan what tasks are going to help students engage, collaborate to analyze that student work, collaborate to support, and collaborate to reflect. What will we change? Another way of thinking about these 6 essentials is they really are 6 shifts from deficit to asset orientation, from low expectations to high expectations, right? From teacher talk, which, hey, sorry, webinar format is just a little more teacher talk, to active learning, right? If this were one of my virtual workshops that I do with my clients, we jump into breakout rooms and we use other formats. Webinar is quick, we're using the chat, but in the classroom, there's a lot of active learning. From teaching to delivery to listening. Listening is at the key, right? And for students who disproportionately are in intervention or sidelined, it's switching from scaffolding to remediate, to accelerate. Looking at how do we create those opportunities to challenge, to stretch. And this is a big one, and it merits a lot more time. From blame and refer to reflect and adapt. That's a culture of leadership and learning in a school. When we are committed to every single student belongs in the school and is capable of the intellectual rigor that we set for all students, when students are not successful, rather than sidelining or marginalizing, we're looking at, okay, yes, this is hard. Yes, there is a distance between where we want to be and where they are now. But what am I not seeing? What are the assets they have right now? What are the opportunities to stretch and change what we're doing to get a different result? Yeah, I'll take questions, and I'm going to share with you a metaphor that I'm pretty passionate about. I mean, how many of you use a GPS, right? I showed a topo map. Yeah, that's kind of old school. But a GPS is great when you're driving. Now, what if you put in the GPS where you're going, Chevy Volt? I'm going to Chevy Volt. That sounds stupid, right? That's not how you use a GPS. You put your destination. But guess what? That is what happens in education. People say, oh, my destination is everyone uses these adopted support strategies that we have in a checklist, and we're going to observe and see that everyone is doing the strategies. That's not the destination. It is a theory of action, and I'm happy with a theory of action, but don't put that in your GPS as the destination, right? What we need to have in there is all students thrive with grade level content and language learning goals. That's the destination in the GPS. Now, here's where the mindsets make or break the GPS. Where are we right now? Your current location. It is your valuing of assets and your observation of students looking for assets. Humility to see assets that are not the same as your own. That is how you know where you are. Precisely, in nuanced ways. And where are you going? It has to be a high expectation. That's the key for this GPS to work. Now, what about if we do this way with multilingual learners? If you look at what students can't do and you expect success just based on language standards, your destination is lower than grade level rigor and where we are. So that's a deficit orientation, right? So it's really key that we are getting specific about assets and learning priorities, and that we expect excellence at grade level and beyond. Not to beat ourselves up. I mean, we need to be clear. It's hard. Teaching is hard. We are not there yet with everybody. But when we can accept that and say that is where we are, and in no shame, but we're committed to roll up our sleeves and keep working until we get there, that's the work of asset-based scaffolding. Observe for assets, expect excellence, and then, as long as we put the right destination in there, when we steer off course, the GPS works. It'll say redirecting, make a U-turn. No, this is not getting the kids to intellectually rich analysis of text. This is not getting kids too confident. Go back to those goals you all put in the beginning. What are the goals you put in the beginning? Right? Those are the destination. Believing they are a math person. If that's my goal, Isabel Garcia, thank you for putting that in there. Am I there? If I'm not, I know to redirect. But if my goal is just to use these 5 adopted strategies, I can be like, I'm doing it, but they're not learning. I'm doing it, right? So we need to have our clarity on the goal and the humility to shift. All right, any questions show up in the chat? Any questions?
I've seen a lot of gratitude so far and no specific questions.
So remember, asset-based scaffolding is a process, and it is rooted in those mindsets, high expectations, valuing, and humble reflection necessary. And it requires data-driven impact. It's never just about the strategies. If somebody says, I have X students and I need more strategies, first of all, recognize, yes, I hear you. It's challenging when the goal and where the kids are is not there. So let's work on strategies. But I promise you, the answer is not just to hand them a bunch of strategies. Most teachers I know, they've learned the strategies I'm talking about a decade ago. It's the nuance of choosing and losing that is where we strengthen our practice. Data-driven a little more. Yes, Sarah, absolutely. We need to be data-driven. Now, data includes numerical data, test scores, and all the different measures we have. It includes formative data from analyzing writing. And it really often includes observation data. What do students say and do? What are students excited about? If you go back to the goal that you put in the chat at the beginning of this webinar, a lot of those goals require observation data, right? Agency. How do I know there's agency? I can look at numbers and spreadsheets all day long, but does that tell me the kid has agency? What's the evidence of agency? What are my success criteria for agency? So if I want to do data-driven teaching to develop student agency, we need to collaborate to build clarity about what agency looks like, what data we're gathering, and how to move. Often we're stuck with certain quantifiable data requirements, and then there's high stakes attached to them. So we're chasing those. But when you ask people what they really want to impact, it's often something that requires observation data. So be sure that is part of your process. All right, Sarah Douglas thank you. The two Sarahs are questions on data. Strategies you use for observation data in a classroom. Okay, so definitely you have to engage, observe. So think pair shared, all the conversation strategies and structures give me valuable formative data. But if you teach, you cannot listen to everybody when you structure partner share. You cannot listen to everybody when you structure a group share. So you have to be selective. In this moment, I'm going to focus here. In this moment, I'm going to focus there. And just recognize, if I'm going to listen to every partner, they're going to be talking too long, unless I found some really fabulous question and task that everyone's super engaged in for a long time, which does happen, but not all tasks are like that. So that is qualitative data, right? Qualitative. My first book is 100% about collaborating in classrooms together, and so has a lot more details about gathering qualitative data and how do we process it collectively. That's a bigger topic. But if you want quantifiable, you want to put a number, you want a rubric score, you might like a download that I have on my website, which is an ELD rubric. It's a way of looking at conversations and quantifying But just know a number is limiting. You know, it helped in a school where we wanted to improve conversations, to have more exchanges. We had certain qualities of the conversation, so we could assess at 3 points in the year and see growth. So if you're looking for that kind of data, a rubric can be helpful for observation data. I hope that's helpful. Thank you for your questions and your collaboration and your participation. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we're down to the last minutes, and I think I'm just gonna stop sharing.
I just want to say thank you, Tonya, for bringing so much insight and expertise and just a really engaging presentation for all of us. This was a really wonderful session. And thank you all for joining us. And we hope to see you at our next Corwin webinar. Take care.
Thank you.